Before all this, I used to think of myself as a pretty grounded guy. A history buff. Sure, I had a small blog, maybe a couple thousand readers, where I'd write about weird historical footnotes. Things you don't find in textbooks. I wasn't a ghost hunter. Not really. I didn't own an EMF meter or one of those spirit boxes that just sound like a broken radio. To me, the haunting was always just the story itself, the psychological echo left behind by a tragedy. The real ghosts were the unanswered questions. And there's no bigger unanswered question in the annals of American crime than what happened in Villisca, Iowa, on a sticky summer night in 1912. This was back in the fall of 2017. My blog was getting a little bit of traction, and I decided I wanted to do a series on historically significant crime scenes. Not just the big ones like the Lizzie Borden house, but the obscure, the truly unsettling. Villisca was at the top of my list. For those of you who aren't familiar with the story, and honestly, be glad you're not, it's a particularly nasty piece of business. On the evening of June 9, 1912, the Moore family, Josiah, Sarah, and their 4 young children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, went to their local Presbyterian church for the Children's Day program. They were a well-liked, church-going family, the absolute bedrock of their small Midwestern community. With them were 2 neighbor girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, who were staying over for a sleepover. A classic, idyllic American scene. Sometime after midnight, after the 8 of them were sound asleep in their beds, an unknown person, or persons, picked up Josiah Moore's own axe from the woodpile, entered the house, and methodically, brutally, murdered every single person inside. They started with the parents, Josiah and Sarah, then moved to the children's rooms. The 2 Stillinger girls, sleeping in the guest room downstairs, were last. But it's the details that elevate this from a simple, horrific crime to something else. Something that crawls under your skin and stays there. The killer, after bludgeoning 8 people to death, took the time to cover each of their faces with bed linens. Then, they went through the small, 2-story house and covered every single mirror and piece of reflective glass with a cloth or an item of clothing. They found a 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon from the icebox and left it on the floor of the downstairs bedroom, leaning it against a wall near a small, discarded keychain. Then they washed their bloody hands in a basin, locked the doors from the inside, and simply vanished, taking the key with them. No one was ever convicted. The case remains cold to this day. That was the story I was there to write about. My plan was simple. Drive to Villisca, take the historical day tour of the house, soak up the atmosphere, and then stay in a comfortable, well-lit motel 10 towns over. I had my buddy, Mark, with me. He was my photographer, and more importantly, my reality check. Mark was, and is, the most skeptical person I know. He believed in taxes, death, and the Green Bay Packers. Ghosts and ghouls were, in his words, a failure of the imagination. The drive into western Iowa is a kind of hypnosis. The world flattens out, cornfields, bleached gold by the late autumn sun, stretch to a horizon so sharp it feels like you could cut yourself on it. The sky is enormous and empty. It's a landscape that makes you feel very, very small. We rolled into Villisca, a town that felt like it was holding its breath. The population sign read just over 1,000 people. You get the sense that a story like the Moore murders doesn't just happen in a town that's small, it happens to it. It becomes part of the soil. The house itself is unassuming. It's a simple, white, wood frame house on a quiet residential street. It looks like every other house on the block. There's no towering Gothic architecture. No ominous, dead trees in the yard. It just sits there, looking tired. That, to me, was the first unsettling thing. Evil should have a grander stage, shouldn't it? We took the daylight tour. A soft-spoken woman in her 60s with a binder full of laminated photos walked us through the rooms. She told the story in a practiced, almost detached way. You could tell she'd done it 1,000 times. Mark was snapping pictures of the period-accurate furniture, the faded wallpaper. I was trying to feel something, to connect with the history. The house was cold, but it was a chilly October day, so that was nothing. The floorboards creaked, but the house was over a century old. Everything had a rational explanation. Still, I started to notice little things. The first real red flag. The one my brain couldn't just file away. We were in the upstairs bedroom. The one that belonged to the Moore children. It was a small room. Just big enough for a bed and a dresser. The air in that specific room was different. Heavier. Colder. Mark even noticed it, pulling his jacket a little tighter. The guide was talking about the children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, when I heard it. A faint tick, tick, tick tick tick. It sounded exactly like a child's toy. A marble or a jack. Dropping on a wooden floor and bouncing to a stop. It came from the attic. Right above our heads. I shot a look at Mark. He was staring at the ceiling. His brow furrowed. The guide didn't flinch. She just kept talking. I raised my hand slightly. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding louder than I intended. "Did you hear that?" She stopped her speech and gave me a patient, tired smile. "The house makes noises," she said, and that was that. She moved on to the next room. Mark leaned in close. "Old pipes," he whispered, but he didn't sound convinced. He was trying to convince himself. I knew then that this wasn't just in my head. The tour continued. We went into the parents' bedroom. The site of the first, most savage attack. It was just a room. A bed, a dresser, a window looking out onto the quiet street. But then I saw the mirrors. Or rather, the lack of them. Every piece of glass was covered, just as the killer had left them. The dresser mirror was draped with a piece of gray muslin. A small hand mirror on the nightstand was turned face down. I found myself staring at the cloth-covered mirror on the dresser. I couldn't look away. My mind started to play tricks on me. I had this overwhelming, irrational certainty that if someone were to pull that cloth away, I wouldn't see my own reflection. I'd see someone else standing behind me. The feeling was so intense, so specific, that the hairs on my arms stood up. I felt a bead of cold sweat trace a path down my spine. "You okay, man?" Mark's voice broke the spell. I blinked, realizing I'd been holding my breath. "Yeah," I mumbled. "Yeah, fine. Just thinking." The last stop was the downstairs guest room where the Stillinger girls, Lena and Ina, had been killed. It was right off the parlor. This room felt the saddest. Two little girls, excited for a sleepover, who never woke up. It was here that the tour guide pointed out the detail of the slab of bacon. No one knows why it was left there. It's a detail so bizarre, so out of place, that it feels like a glitch in reality. As the tour ended and we stepped back out into the crisp afternoon air, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, like I had surfaced from underwater. The plan was to leave, get in the car, drive an hour to Des Moines, get a burger and a beer, and write my article from the safety of a Holiday Inn. But something had shifted in me. The historian who wanted to document a tragedy was being shouldered aside by a primal, terrifying curiosity. The sounds, the cold spots, the feeling in front of that mirror. My brain, Mark's brain, could explain them all away. Drafts, old pipes, overactive imagination. But what if we should stay? I said, the words surprising me as much as they did Mark. He stopped, car keys in hand. "Stay where, Alex? The nearest hotel is 30 miles away." "No," I said, looking back at the quiet White House. "I mean stay here. They do overnight stays. For investigators." Mark stared at me like I just suggested we go swimming in a volcano. "Are you insane? You heard the lady. It's just noises. It's a tourist trap for guys with ghost hunting shows. We got the pictures. Let's go." Normally, I would have agreed with him. He was the voice of reason. But that feeling of being watched by something behind the glass, it wouldn't leave me, just for a few hours. I pleaded, "We don't have to stay all night. We'll set up some audio recorders. Sit in the parlor until midnight. If nothing happens, we leave. I just need more for the article." The atmosphere. I was lying. I didn't care about the article anymore. I needed to know. It took another 20 minutes of convincing. But he finally, reluctantly, agreed. I think he was more afraid of me thinking he was scared than he was of the house itself. We paid the extra fee to the Historical Society, signed a waiver that was about an inch thick, and were handed a single, old-fashioned skeleton key. The guide's final words to us were, "Lock the door behind you. Don't use any open flames. And we're not responsible for any personal experiences." The emergency contact number is on the fridge. She didn't wish us good luck. At 6 p.m., the sun began to set, painting the vast Iowa sky in brutal shades of orange and purple. The temperature dropped, and as we turned that key in the lock, sealing ourselves inside the Villisca Axe Murder House, the silence that fell was unlike any I had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet, it was a heavy, suffocating blanket of silence. All the little background noises of life, the distant traffic, the barking dogs, the hum of electricity, were gone. The only sounds were our own breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. We set up our base in the parlor, the main living area. Mark set up his camera on a tripod, pointing it toward the bottom of the staircase. I placed 2 digital audio recorders in the house, one on the small table in the parlor with us, and one upstairs, on the floor of the children's bedroom, right where I'd heard the marble drop. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened, absolutely nothing. We sat in camping chairs, sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos, speaking in whispers. The silence began to feel normal. The adrenaline wore off. Mark started checking football scores on his phone. I was beginning to feel foolish. He was right. It was a tourist trap. An old, creaky house full of sad memories and nothing more. Told you, he said around 9:30 p.m. Looking bored. Can we get out of here? I think there's a 24-hour diner in Corning. Just till 11. I said, let's just give it till 11. And that's when we heard the second red flag. It was different from the sound I'd heard earlier. It wasn't a toy. It was a voice. A whisper. It was so faint. It was like trying to hear a feather fall in another room. It came from upstairs. We both froze, staring at the dark maw of the staircase. It wasn't words, just a sound, a soft, sighing vocalization. What was that? Mark whispered, his phone forgotten in his lap. I don't know. I breathed. Maybe the wind? But there was no wind. The night was perfectly still. This is the point in the story where your brain starts to fight itself. One half is screaming, get out, leave now. The other, more curious, more foolish half says, you need proof, you need to understand. I chose to listen to the foolish half. I'm going to go get the recorder, I said, my voice shaky. I'll be right back. No, dude, don't, Mark said, his eyes wide in the gloom. Let's just go. We'll get it in the morning. It's fine. I'll just be a second. Every step up that staircase was a conscious effort. The wood groaned under my weight, each creak echoing through the silent house like a gunshot. The air grew colder with each step. That same heavy, unnatural cold from the children's bedroom. I didn't turn on my flashlight. I don't know why. It felt disrespectful. I moved by the pale moonlight filtering through the grime on the windows. I reached the top of the stairs. The upstairs landing was a pool of deep shadow. To my left was the parents' bedroom. To my right, the children's room. I could see the little red light of my audio recorder blinking patiently on the floor inside. I took one step into the room, and the door to the parents' bedroom, the one on my left, slowly, deliberately, creaked open about 6 inches. I stopped, dead still. My blood turned to ice water. I could see nothing in the darkness of the doorway. Just a deeper, more absolute black. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stood there, waiting. Nothing happened. The door just hung there, open. A rational mind would say it was a draft, a pressure change, but there were no drafts. And the silence that followed was charged, expectant. I felt, with a certainty that defied all logic, that something was standing in that doorway, watching me. I abandoned the audio recorder. I turned, slowly, and walked back down the stairs. I didn't run. I was too scared to run. I felt like if I made any sudden movements, it would give chase. When I got back to the parlor, Mark could see it on my face. What happened? The door, I said, my teeth chattering slightly. The parents' bedroom door. It opened. He just stared at me, his face pale. And that's when we both heard it. From upstairs, clear as day, the sound of children's footsteps. Not a single footstep, a series of them, fast, the pitter-patter of small, bare feet running across the wooden floor of the hallway above us. A frantic, playful, joyful sound that was the most terrifying thing I have ever heard in my life. It was the sound of life in a house of death. It lasted for maybe 5 seconds. then stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that rushed back in was worse than before. "Okay," Mark said, his voice a strained whisper. "Okay, that's it, we're done. We're leaving right now." He stood up and started grabbing his coat. I didn't argue. All my curiosity had curdled into pure animal terror. We were trespassers here. We were not welcome. We grabbed our gear, fumbling in the dark. Mark snatched his camera off the tripod. My only thought was the key. We needed the key to unlock the door to get out. I'd left it on the small table next to my chair. I reached for it, my hand shaking, and my fingers brushed against something else. Something that hadn't been there before. It was cold and slick. I recoiled my hand as if I'd been burned. Mark fumbled with his phone, turning on the flashlight and pointing it at the table. Lying next to the old skeleton key was a single, small, glass marble. It was milky white with a swirl of blue in the center. It was the source of the tick-tick-tick I'd heard earlier. But it hadn't been there when we sat down. I would have seen it. I would have felt it. We stared at it for a second that stretched into an eternity. And that's when the final sound began. It didn't come from upstairs. It came from the bottom of the staircase. From the direction of the kitchen. It was a slow, rhythmic sound. Thump, scrape. A pause. Thump, scrape. It was a heavy sound. The sound of something being dragged. The thump was a dull, weighted impact. The scrape was the sound of metal dragging across old wooden floorboards. Thump, scrape. It was getting closer, moving from the kitchen, towards the parlor, towards us. And I knew, with a horrifying, gut-wrenching clarity, what that sound was. It was the sound of an axe. The heavy, flat side of the blade thumping against the floor, and the sharp edge scraping a groove in the wood. This wasn't the children. This wasn't a sad, residual memory. This was something else. This was active. This was malevolent. This was the thing that had walked through this house one night in 1912. And it was walking again. We didn't scream. The fear was too deep for that. It was a cold, paralyzing terror that stole the air from your lungs. Mark grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice, and pulled me toward the front door. I snatched the key off the table, my fingers closing around the cold metal. Thump, scrape. It was in the parlor now, just around the corner from where we stood, hidden by the darkness. I jammed the key into the old lock, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries. The lock groaned, a horrible, loud sound, and the scraping stopped. Absolute silence. The entity, whatever it was, knew we were leaving. It was waiting. The lock finally turned. We threw the door open and burst out into the night. The cold October air felt like heaven. We didn't look back. We sprinted to the car, threw our gear in the back, and jumped inside. I locked the doors, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they would break. As Mark started the engine, the car's headlights flooded the front of the house. For a split second, I looked up at the window of the parents' bedroom on the 2nd floor. And I swear to you, I swear on my life, I saw the curtain move. Just a slight twitch, as if someone had been standing there, watching us leave, and had just stepped back into the darkness. We drove out of Villisca at nearly 100 miles an hour. We didn't speak for at least an hour. The only sound was the hum of the engine and our own ragged breathing. When we finally got back to my apartment days later, we went through the evidence. The pictures Mark took were normal. Just photos of an old, empty house. But the audio was a different story. We isolated the whisper we'd heard, with the background noise filtered out. It was clearly a child's voice. A little girl. And she was saying 2 words. Over and over again. He's here. Then we listened to the recording from the end of the night. From Mark's camera that had been pointed at the stairs. The sound was there. The horrifying thump, scrape, clear and undeniable. But there was something else. Just before we burst out the door, just after the scraping stopped, the microphone picked up one more sound. A deep, guttural breath. A long, slow, satisfied exhalation, like a predator that has enjoyed the hunt. I shut down my blog after that. I couldn't write about it. I couldn't reduce what happened to a story for people to read over their morning coffee. It felt real, and it felt dangerous. I never found out what happened to that audio recorder I left in the children's room. It's probably still sitting there on the floor, its little red light blinking in the dark. There's no amount of money in the world that could convince me to go back for it. It's been years. Mark and I don't talk about that night. We don't have to. It's a scar on our memory. But the real haunting isn't what's left in that house in Iowa. The real haunting is what you take with you. To this day, I can't be in a two-story house alone at night. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes sends a jolt of ice through my veins. I have to check, double-check, triple-check that my doors are locked. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, in that deep, profound silence just before sleep, I can still hear it, faintly, as if from a great distance. Thump, scrape, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very soul, that whatever is in that house is still awake, still walking, and still waiting.